Donald Trump has just been labelled as a dictator after new comments have released from Donald Trump himself stating that he wishes to serve a third term. Now, of course, this is something that actually just can't happen. It is known that presidents can only serve a maximum of 2 terms and then they must resign presidency, either hand it over to their vice president, or that's if they get re-elected into power, or hand it over to their opposition if they lose the next general election. But you're probably wondering, is this even legal? Can this even happen? And what are the legalities of, well, this if it should come to pass? Well, don't you worry. I'm going to be diving into that today so that you can just strap yourselves in, have a little listen, and let's just find out what happens. So, what if the very foundation of American democracy, something millions of people have trusted for well over 200 years now, was challenged by someone who's already held the highest office in the land? What if a former president already elected for 2 terms comes back and says, "I'm not done yet"? This isn't just a conspiracy theory. This is happening right now. In 2025, Donald J. Trump said he's, quote, "not joking about running for a 3rd term." That statement has set off huge alarm bells, not just in political circles, but in the legal world too. Today on Simply Crime, we're diving into the law and loopholes that have and how devastating this situation could potentially become, not just for an election, but for the future of American democracy itself. Let's start with the facts. In the 22nd Amendment of the United States Constitution, ratified in 1951, says, quote, "No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice." This obviously is short. It's very clear, it's to the point, and it is historically ironclad. Nobody has ever tried to go against this. The amendment was a direct response to Franklin D. Roosevelt's 4 consecutive terms after World War II. Lawmakers wanted to ensure that no one could hold onto presidency indefinitely. The US is not a monarchy, and term limits help protect that. So, by the letter of the law, Trump or anyone else who has been elected twice cannot legally be elected again. But does this mean he can't serve again? Well, that's where this whole situation gets incredibly complicated. Donald Trump has recently hinted that there's methods that would allow him to return to power. While he hasn't publicly clarified all of those methods, there are theories, and some of them are legally questionable at the very best. So one strategy that Donald Trump has, or people have thought that Donald Trump might go down, is including his vice president, J.D. Vance. So the idea is that Vance runs in 2028, and if he wins, then he suddenly resigns, and as vice president, Trump would then ascend back into presidency. Obviously, this is an entire loophole that whether I don't know whether this would actually be legally allowed or not, but that's a potential loophole that Donald Trump might try and basically exploit. Sounds very clever, right? But here's the issue. Legal scholars argue that this violates the spirit of the 22nd Amendment. Even if Trump isn't actually elected, he'd be serving in the role again, essentially skirting around the democratic intent of the actual amendment itself. Another theory, amending the Constitution itself. In early 2025, Representative Andy Ogles proposed a resolution to modify the 22nd Amendment, allowing presidents who have served 2 non-consecutive terms to seek a 3rd. But changing the Constitution isn't actually easy. First of all, it requires a 2/3 vote in both House and Senate, and the ratification by 3/4 of the US states. With the current division in American politics, this is highly unlikely to actually succeed and move forwards. But let's imagine Trump goes ahead and runs in 2028. What would actually happen? Well, first, there would be an immediate legal challenge. Civil rights groups, constitutional watchdogs, and election officials would file lawsuits to block his name and from appearing on state ballots. Each state has its own election laws, and many would argue that listing Trump violates federal constitutional law. Federal courts and ultimately the Supreme Court would be also forced to intervene. Their ruling would be critical in shaping not just this election, but every presidential race in the actual future. Now, let's take it a step further. Let's say he runs in 2028 and he actually ends up winning. That's where we enter dangerous territory. If Trump secures a majority of the general electoral college, but the legality of his candidacy is still up for dispute, Congress might actually refuse to certify the results. This has never happened in US history, and it would plunge the nation into unprecedented constitutional crisis. The domino effect of such a crisis could be catastrophic. Protesters could flood the streets both for and against Donald Trump. State governors would challenge federal rulings. Law enforcement agencies would find themselves caught in the middle of political tension. The military would then be pressured to choose sides. And that's not speculation. We saw a glimpse of this instability during the January 6th Capitol riots. But if Trump defies a constitutional amendment and somehow regains power, it's not just democracy at risk, it's the entire rule of law. This is what's at stake here should this come to pass. The Constitution only works when people in power agree to follow it. If someone decides to ignore it and gets away with it, it creates a precedent. A precedent that future leaders might end up following, leading us away from democracy and towards authoritarianism or a dictatorship. Here's another big question. If Trump knowingly violates the 22nd Amendment, could he actually be criminally charged? On a technicality, no. The 22nd Amendment doesn't actually carry a criminal penalty. It doesn't say you'll be arrested if you run for a third time. It simply makes it unconstitutional to be elected more than twice. That means the response wouldn't be a criminal one, it would be political and legal. But the danger lies in normalization. If there's no punishment and no one stops it, the Constitution becomes more of a suggestion than an actual binding rule. Now, this isn't just about Donald Trump. It's about the limits of American democracy. If a former president already elected twice can manipulate the system and potentially return to office, it raises some very serious questions. One, how strong is the Constitution really? Can the courts act fast enough to actually protect it? And what happens if the public loses faith in the elections altogether? Trump's third term may seem like a hypothetical, but its implications are very real. The legal framework of the United States is being tested with this, and whether or not it holds will define the future of the Republic. So, can Trump legally run for a third term? No, not under Constitution. But will he try? Maybe. And if he does, the country may find itself in one of the greatest constitutional battles of all time. But what do you make of this? Should Donald Trump be allowed to run for a third term? Should he even be questioning this? Does that already kind of mock the Constitution? Let me know your guys' thoughts and opinions on this down in the comments below. Americans, what do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. While you're down there, jump scare the hell out of that like button. And until next time, I'll speak to you later. Peace.